Welcome to the All Out Leadership Podcast, hosted by Pastor Eric Lawson, where each episode is uniquely designed to help you live all out by bringing you practical leadership from a biblical perspective delivered in 10 minutes or less. So whether you're a business leader, serving in ministry, or simply looking to grow in your leadership, this podcast is for you. Before we dive into this week's topic, make sure to subscribe to the podcast and download the show notes at ericlawson.com/podcast. And while you're at it, feel free to share the content on social media. Now, let's join Pastor Eric for this week's conversation.
Welcome back to another edition of the All Out Leadership Podcast. We're continuing in the life of David. The last 2 weeks, we've been looking at the importance of friends and team, having the right people around you. And I ran out of time last week and didn't get to give you actual steps on how we find these covenant friends like David and Jonathan and the relationship that they had. So this week's bonus content is I'm going to give you a couple practical things on how you find covenant friends. Just keep in mind in life, you're going to have very few of these, and that's okay. You're going to have many friends, but you're going to probably have few covenant friends. And these are the people that they are just there with you for life, no matter what, thick and thin. I've had a lot of friends in my life that they'll come and they're there for a season and God brought them there. And then we just, for whatever reason, we just drift apart. Life gets busy. We go separate ways and we may never see each other this side of heaven. We're still friends. We care about each other, but there were seasonal friends and God brought them into your life for a different season, and that's okay. And I've had a lot of those and I'll probably have many more. But in my life, I can look and see that there have been some covenant friendships along the way that have helped me go exponentially much farther than I could have ever gone myself. And that's what we see inside of this covenant relationship between David and Jonathan. So let's talk about how do you get one or two of these covenant friends at some point in your life. Well, how did David and Jonathan become covenant friends? Well, we got to look at what happened right before David and Jonathan made a covenant with one another. David had just killed Goliath. And as Jonathan began to see this man who really was a reflection of himself, they were kindred spirits. They were like-minded in vision and values. And that's what you'll often see in a covenant friendship is there's an alignment. There is a kindred spirit in vision, values, and life mission. It's like you just exist for the same reason. It's like you just get one another, and you could finish one another's sentences because like at the core, you're just so much alike. Again, you got your personality differences, but like who you are, what you exist for, you're alike. And that's what we see in David and Jonathan. Jonathan was a warrior. There's some great stories about Jonathan and achievements that he did. Before we get into the story of David, if you want to go back, you can study that. But Jonathan was a warrior. He fought against impossible odds. And so he sees David going out there, 17 years old, with that same spirit. He goes, hey, I love this kid. He reminds me of myself. So here's just step number one. If you'll fight the battles that are in front of you, and you will be a winner at what God's called you to do, where you are right now, what you'll find is it will attract that right covenant friend to your life. Because you're on mission, it will attract someone else who has that same mission. When I look at my closest covenant friends, we're really all the same in terms of we love ministry. When we get together, we talk ministry. We show each other battle scars. We lift up our shirt and go, hey, I remember I got this stabbed this time, and I got shot this time from this person. I was betrayed here. And we all got war stories, and we can relate to one another. And that's what you'll find often in covenant friendships is you just relate. Man, you've been in war together. We'll see this pattern in people who often actually go to physical combat together. The foxhole relationships are just lifelong friendships, and you'll die for that kindred person. Why? Because you fought by them. You have stories that nobody else can relate to. And so when you're doing what God's called you to do, and you're succeeding and you're winning, you're going to find, because of the law of attraction, we're going to get to that here in a future lesson, that you're going to attract that covenant friendship as you're doing what God has called you to do. So what David didn't do is put a social media post out. Hey, everybody, I'm really looking for a serious covenant friend. I'm kind of lonely here. Fill out this application. That didn't happen. David was going about what God called him to do, and God brought him this covenant friendship when David was doing what David needed to do. So you just fight the battles and you'll begin to see these people emerge. The second thing is this: if you want a covenant friend, then you better be a covenant friend. So you may not be able to control where that covenant friend is right now that you don't have yet, but you can go ahead and be attractional by being a covenant friend, because some people are working the law of repellent, not the law of attraction. So look, he who wants friends needs to show himself friendly, Proverbs 18:24. So just do a little test on yourself. Are you a good friend? What are you doing with the friendships you have right now? See, if you aren't good with the friends you have right now, then why should God send you a top-notch level 10 friendship when you aren't taking care of the level 6 friendships you have? If you're mean to your friends, you gossip about your friends, you betray your friends, you're unfaithful as a friend right now to what you have, why should God send you a higher quality friendship? So just start with what you have. Be good where you are. Be a friend. As the Holy Spirit brings to your mind a friend, pray for them. Send them a text. Hey, thinking about you today. Part of being a friend is what we see in Jonathan is he was selfless. David was also selfless in his friendship with Jonathan. So just be selfless. How are you giving of your time, your talent, and your treasure to help invest into the friends you do have right now to help them succeed? If you'll just be a friend to who you have, you'll find that you will attract these other covenant friendships. And a third thing is this: you might have to pray them in. You might have to be very intentional and pray for them. I have found that inside of my life, most of my covenant friends, I actually had a season where I felt I was in a wilderness. I had a season of drought. Like we talked about on an earlier podcast where God allowed David to realize he had a need and that it wasn't good that he was alone. There are times in my life that God would allow me these seasons of drought where I actually became lonely. And I was like, I'm missing something. And here's what that season did. I turned my care into a prayer. I took that and I said, okay, God, I see a need for a friendship. I see a need for a covenant friend. And I began to pray that. And when I was in high school, I gave my life to Christ, and I had cut ties with all the friendships that I had had previously. Now today, many of it we're still friends. Many of them have come to Christ. But I had to cut relational ties, meaning I wasn't hanging out with them. I wasn't going to the parties because all that took me away from Christ, didn't lead me to him. So I was friendless. And so here I am at 15 years old. I give my life to Christ. I'm in a high school of 1,600 students, and I was lonely. And I was sharing my faith, and I was winning people to Christ, and I was standing up for Jesus, but I was alone. And my mom one day came across Mark 11:23, and it's it's whatever you desire in prayer, ask God, and whoever says to this mountain, be thou removed and cast into the sea. And I'm like, you know what, I got a need. So I asked God, and I just began to just speak the promises of God that he would supply me and meet this need of a good covenant friend. And it was just literally a week later. Now, I had gone friendless for like 6 months, and I'd been complaining to God. My complaints didn't move the hand of God, by the way. I'd murmured to God. My murmuring didn't move the hand of God. And it was interesting. It wasn't until I prayed a prayer of faith and stood on some promises of Scripture, a week later, 3 new guys show up to our church out of nowhere. 3 guys about the same age, just slightly older than me. And they showed up, and it was just like instantaneously we became covenant friends, covenant brothers. And I went through all high school with these guys. Man, we prayed together. We went street evangelism together. We were accountability partners together. I mean, we were never alone in terms of like, we went through a problem. Your battle's my battle. Your need's my need. And we just took care of one another. And those guys got me through a very difficult and formational season of my life. And I can honestly say a lot of who I am today is attributed to these 3 covenant brothers that God had put into my life. And you know what? I don't even know where they are today. We haven't even talked for like 30 years. But you know what? God used them in that season of my life. And if they showed up today, I'd give them the back off my shirt, the shirt off my back, and vice versa. And we'll be covenant friends throughout all of eternity. But they were people that God sent into my life for a season. But I had to pray them in. So if you see the need for a covenant friend or 2, fight the battles you have in front of you. You become a great friend with who you do have. And number 3, you just stand in faith, stand on God's promises, and you begin to pray them in and watch God show up and meet that need in your life. All right, see you next week. I'm excited about next week's podcast. We're going to be talking about from hero to zero. You don't want to miss it. See you next week.
Thank you for joining us on the All Out Leadership Podcast. We hope you gained new biblical insight that challenged you to grow in your leadership. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, we would love your help in getting the content out farther. You can help by subscribing to the podcast at ericlawson.com/podcast and telling others about it. Next week, Pastor Eric will be back with another episode. So until then, we hope you have a great week being an all-out leader.